All right, Bio 30. So we're going to do the second video on pedigrees. Now, there's a couple ways you can solve pedigree questions, one of which involves memorizing patterns. So which generations are more likely to have certain patterns versus others, if like traits are more commonly found in males than in females, or if they skip a generation, or uh, sort of intricate patterns like that. I'll post slides that will have these patterns on them. Those are helpful if you have a question, a very specific type of question where I would ask if there's more than one mode of inheritance possible, what would be most likely, and then you could sort of give reasoning using those various patterns of modes of inheritance. But for this video, I'm going to make it very simple. It's a foolproof method to determine at least which modes of inheritance are possible, and it's trial and error. And so you have to have a pencil and an eraser to do these questions. You don't want to use a pen because you will be writing and erasing numerous times to answer the question. It takes a little longer, but has always been a wonderful way for students to get the questions right every single time. I teach my Bio 30s this, I teach my Science 30s this. Doesn't matter the course, you will get the pedigree correct every single time if you follow this method. So, like we said, pedigrees have a family tree basically, and we're following a gene or a trait throughout multiple generations within that family. Last video, we talked about what certain symbols meant. Shaded symbols mean that that's an affected individual. Non-shaded open symbols mean that they're not affected by that trait. And then circles are females, squares are males. And so we want to pay attention as we go throughout these options. A mode of inheritance is basically describing how is that gene passed through the generations. And so is that trait a autosomal trait? And if it is it passed on recessively or through the dominant trait? Like, is it a capital? Do you have to have a capital letter to pass it on? So is it the dominant trait that passes it on, or are you only affected by that trait if you have the lowercase homozygous recessive versions of that trait? Or is it X-linked? So is it X-linked recessive or X-linked dominant? If it's X-linked, then it's a sex-linked chromosome attached to the X chromosome. So in this case, sex matters. Are you male? Are you female? It's going to matter to show if you have it or don't have it and what probabilities are if you have it and don't have it will be. Or you could be Y-linked. If you're Y-linked, then you are very much so going to only have it as a male. So again, it's a sex-linked trait. So I like to start these off. We're going to go through each of these 5 options of the modes of inheritance, and we're going to see if this trait in question is passed on through the autosomal recessive, autosomal dominant, X-linked recessive, X-linked dominant, or Y-linked modes of inheritance. Ideally, there's only going to be one possible mode. You may do questions where you cannot eliminate more than one mode, and so more than one mode are possible. You just don't have enough information to figure out which one is the most likely. Okay, so we're going to get started. So I like to pick one right off the bat. The one I like to get rid of right away, you don't have to do any work for it, is the Y-linked. If you have a Y-linked trait, you're only going to have affected males. So you should never have a colored in circle, because the colored in circle on your pedigree would imply that females are affected by that trait. And since females don't have the Y chromosome, you will never have a Y-linked trait affect a female. And so since I see that there are shaded circles as well as shaded squares, I can see that there's women that are affected. And so right off the bat, I have to do no work. I automatically know that it is not going to be a Y-linked trait. Once I get the Y out of the way, I like to go to autosomal recessive. So if you were solving one of these questions, I would quickly write AR, AD, XR, XD, and Y just on the off to the side of your pedigree so you can do the work we're about to do. This is where we're going to record which ones it could be, which ones it couldn't be. So now I'm going to go autosomal recessive. If this was an autosomal recessive trait that I'm following in this pedigree, I'm going to go and assign genotypes to these phenotypic individuals according to that mode of inheritance. So if you are affected and you have an autosomal recessive trait, then you have to be little letter, lowercase. So this individual is going to be little a. I'm going to use A's in our example here. Doesn't matter what letter you use. So the only way that this person can be affected if it was a autosomal recessive trait is if they had little a. Same with this individual. This man, doesn't matter that he's male because we're not looking at a sex-linked trait right now, but the only way he could have it is if it was little a. They have 3 kids. This child is not affected, and so they have a big A for sure, because as soon as they have a big capital letter, this is an autosomal recessive trait, they won't have this this trait, whatever it is we're looking at. And I'm going to put a line here. They're big A something. I don't know if they are big A. I don't know if they're big A, little a. As long as they have that capital A there, I know that they don't have the trait. Now I have to ask myself, can this individual get a big A allele from his parents? It's a male, they're not affected, so they're not shaded in, but this big A has to come from one of the parents. Remember, you get one allele from mom and one allele from dad. So you're going to inevitably, this individual is going to get one letter from mom, one letter from dad, but mom and dad only have little a's to give. Between these 4 alleles total, all of them are little a. This gentleman, this son cannot receive a big A from the mom or the dad, and so right off the bat, I know, I don't have to go any further, I know that this is not possible. We cannot have an autosomal recessive trait in this phenotype because there's no way that this individual, or frankly this individual, could have a big A in their phenotype. So that's done. We've already eliminated now the AR. We eliminated the Y-linked mode of inheritance before that. I'm going to whip out my eraser. We're going to erase, and we're going to start over. So we're now going to say, hey, what if it was an autosomal dominant trait? So I'm looking at the AD. Well, if it's an autosomal dominant trait, they have to have just one capital letter, and they're going to show that trait. So this woman, her gender doesn't matter right now, but she's for sure got a big A. She's a big A something. I'm going to leave a blank there right now. I'm going to have to fill that in potentially later, but for now I know she's got a big A. Same with this gentleman that she marries, also for sure has a big A, and then something. We don't know what his second allele is yet. As long as he has one big A, he's going to express that autosomal dominant trait. They have 3 kids. Well, this kid does not have the trait. They're not affected. So the only way they can be not affected by autosomal dominant trait is if their genotype is homozygous recessive, right? If the trait we're looking at, the mode of inheritance is indeed autosomal dominant, then they have to have a capital letter, at least one capital letter, in order to be shaded in or have that trait, express that trait. This son here is not shaded in. If it was an autosomal dominant trait, he would have to have a genotype of little a, homozygous recessive. And so I got to ask myself, is that possible? Well, yeah, it sure is possible, assuming that mom was heterozygous with a little a, and that dad was also heterozygous with a little a. And that would be totally fine. Mom could totally be heterozygous and still be affected if this were autosomal dominant, and dad, same thing. He could be affected even though he was heterozygous, assuming this was an autosomal dominant trait, which we are assuming right now. So then son would get a little a from mom, a little a from dad. He's happy. Same with the daughter, a little a from mom, a little a from dad. Totally possible. This son is affected, and so he has to have one big A for sure, and something. Now he could have received a little a from mom or dad, or he could have received the big A from mom or dad. We don't know yet. And so we're going to leave that blank, big A something. As long as he's got that big A, he's going to have that, he's going to show that trait. This man, we got to keep going. So we have, up until now, we have not been able to say, no, this is not autosomal dominant. We haven't eliminated this option yet. And because we haven't eliminated it, we got to keep going until we either can eliminate it, and you may have to go all the way down to find out, or you can't eliminate it, and you know that that's got to be a plausible option for the mode of inheritance in this unlabeled blank pedigree. Okay, this man who's affected marries a woman who's unaffected. So little a is her genotype. She marries in. We don't have to worry about her parents because we don't know her parents. These two have kids. They have 2 daughters. One daughter is affected. So she's going to have a big A and something. The only way she could have a big A is if she got it from dad, which she totally could have. And we know her second allele for sure is going to be a little a. Because if she got the big A from dad, then she has to get her second allele from mom. And mom only has little a's to give. And so she's going to receive a little a over here. The second daughter is unaffected. This daughter is for sure then a little a, little a. We have to check if that's possible. Well, mom definitely gave one of those little a's. Dad could have given a little a, assuming he was heterozygous, and that's very possible. So now we're going to say, okay, we filled in that blank. This daughter got little a would make sense. This daughter, the affected daughter, married a man outside of the family that was not affected. So to be not affected, in this case, we've got little a. Totally possible. We don't have to stress because we don't care about her parents. We can't verify that. So we're going to go ahead and say little a did not be affected. And then these two have 4 kids. Well, they have a son that's affected, and so he for sure has a big A and a something. Well, he totally could have received a big A from mom, and then very likely, therefore, received a lowercase a from dad. This son is unaffected, therefore had to have the genotype little a. Very possible because mom and dad have a little a they could have given. This daughter, one affected, one large A for sure because she's affected, and just like this first son, if she got the big A from mom, she would have had to have gotten the little a from dad. And then this son is not affected, so little a. Well, I've just finished this entire pedigree. Everybody's been assigned a genotype, and I have not been able to say that I have no reason to think that this is not an autosomal dominant trait. So I'm going to put a check mark here. I cannot say that this is not autosomal dominant. So it's very likely going to be, I'm going to star this here, it's very likely that it's an autosomal dominant trait. I can't say for sure that that's the only mode of inheritance. If you were on an exam and you knew based off how the question was asked that there's only one possible option and you found it to be AD right now and you don't have time to keep checking the other 2, you could stop here and take a chance, make an estimated guess here and say that it's AD, autosomal dominant, as the mode of inheritance. I'm going to keep going though and just show you if you were to finish this entire question and make certain what the answer was, how you would do that. So once again, I'm going to whip my eraser out and I'm going to erase all of this and I'm going to try it again and see if it's not X-linked recessive as well, or could possibly be X-linked recessive. So assuming now we're on X-linked recessive, now gender matters, the sex matters. So all my women are going to be 2 X chromosomes. So I'm just going to give this girl up at the top here 2 X's. And I'm going to give this man an X and a Y. So don't forget, as soon as you talk about X-linked or Y-linked, you're talking sex-linked. And so you have to look at the X's and the Y's for the males and the X for the female. All right. Assuming that this is a recessive trait, the mode of inheritance X-linked recessive would imply that to be shaded or to be affected, they have both lowercase letters. So I'm going to stick with the A's. I'm going to put a lowercase a on the top here and a lowercase a on the top here. That's the only way that this girl can be affected by this X-linked recessive trait. This male is also shaded in. The only way he can be affected by an X-linked trait is if he has the lowercase recessive a attached to his X allele. His Y's got nothing to do with this. So assuming that that's okay, let's go to the next generation. They have 3 kids. They've got a son. So the son is XY, and that son is not affected by this X-linked recessive trait. If that were true, he would have to have a big A on his X-linked trait. Now we have to check, is that possible? Well, mom does not have an X big A allele to give. Dad does not have an X big A allele to give. So there's no way that you could have this. And so therefore, not possible. I've eliminated it right there. 3 people into this pedigree, boom, it's not X-linked recessive. So I'm well on my way to making sure that I had my answer right with AD, autosomal dominant, but I'm going to erase it and just make sure. So now I'm going to go X-linked dominant. This guy here, my very last one. Well, in order to be X-linked dominant, I still care about the sex. So this is XX for the female, XY for the male. In order to be affected by an X-linked dominant trait, you're going to have one big A on your X and then something on this X. Don't know, and right now, don't care. As long as there's a big A, definitely affected. This individual is a male. To be affected by an X-linked dominant trait, they have to have a big A on their X. So now we're going to go down here to this male. Well, this male is unaffected. So to be unaffected and be a male for an X-linked dominant trait, you have to have a little a on your X. So this is, well, let's check. Is this possible? Well, the Y is going to have to come from dad. So if the Y comes from dad, then the other allele has to come from mom. The only way that mom can give this gentleman, this son, a little a allele on his X is if she also had a little ax. So if she were heterozygous, this would be possible. But let's check this daughter. The daughter is unaffected, so she's XX. But to be unaffected with an X-linked dominant trait, she has to have a little a on both her X alleles. She can definitely get an X little a from mom, but her other allele has to come from dad, and dad only has one X allele, and that X comes with a big A on it from dad, because dad was affected. So dad doesn't have an X little a to give, and so this is not possible. This is going to break down right here. So boom, right there. You now have gone through all 5 options, and you can make certain that your answer is for sure X-linked dominant. A little bit of trial and error. It took a little bit of time to solve it for sure, but you will get this correct every single time. I will post PowerPoint slides with the patterns that would help you reason through an answer if there was more than one mode of inheritance possible. But truly, if you can do this trial and error method, work through all 5 options and just make sure that you for sure have 1 or possibly 2 correct answers, then you should be confident that you know how to do this. I'm going to end the video here. And if you have any questions, please put it in the comments below or send me an email. Thanks. Bye.